All right. Welcome, everybody, to this week's Griscom stream celebrating 10,000 subscribers. I can't thank y'all enough. Seriously, it's meant so much to Matt and I over these past few months. Obviously, these are circumstances we never could have imagined, but we're still so touched by the community that we're able to be a part of and are continuing to build. And y'all are a huge, huge part of it. We couldn't be doing it without y'all. So, seriously, thank everybody so much for showing up. Looking forward to what we're able to do next. I mean, you know, might be there's a few things that we're still trying to build. The next big one is trying to get us to 1,000 patrons so that we can really start expanding. The real hope when Matt and I really first started sitting down talking about this show was to create something where not only were we able to cover parts of the country, and also, global events in a way that we didn't really see was being done by many other outlets, but also starting to do a lot more in-person work. Because I think that that's something that's very much missing. It's been incredible to see the explosion of online leftist, content and shows and news sources out there. But I think the next big step is going to be to start putting people on the ground. Being able to talk to folks from all around the country, getting them in their own words, being able to cover things that might not percolate to the top of like the online media sphere, but are very important to, people on the ground and in their communities. So building those networks and roots, I think, is something that we're really striving to do. But of course, we have to get to certain levels of funding to be able to really, travel like we'd like to, bring in some more folks. But we're kicking a few ideas to start working on that. Still super premature. I've been talking to a couple friends about knocking out a couple documentaries in the near future. So really looking forward to doing that. And also, just being able to travel again after being cooped up for so long. I really was hoping to have been able to make it out to Alabama, but I wasn't able to make it work. But, definitely in the future, things like that, Matt and I would definitely like to be more of a part of it. Showing up, y'all. I mean, it's just being a part of the community out there. And I think that's the next big step that I want this show to take. And the next step that I want this show to take, but also I think I'd like us all to start taking too in our lives, making sure that we're really getting out there in the community, because that's critical. But we'll start at least early on with a good news stream, because there's a couple things to celebrate. And then I'm always happy to take your chat questions and your super chats. I always see Comrade Joe Snuffy's here. So I'll read that in just 1 second. But I just want to say I really appreciate all of y'all so much. And thank you so much for allowing this to happen, and looking forward to the future. So cheers. So Joe says, hey, David, congrats on hitting 10,000 subs. Well, thank you so much. When the show turns 21 this Thursday, what will its first legal drink be? Oh, and screw those WSWS cosplayers. Yeah. Well, I don't know, man. I've really been digging ranch water. I don't know if you ever had that before, but it's just it's tequila, Topo Chico, sparkling water, and lime. It's absolutely perfect, and I think that's probably what I'll be having on Thursday. After this, I'm going to be doing a little bit of celebrating with producer Forrest, and we'll be having some margaritas too. I've been on a real tequila kick since I've gone back to Texas, so definitely looking forward to that. Also, just as a little pitch to folks too, to support us on Patreon, along with all of the incredible content, and people should definitely check out the interview I did yesterday with our friends from the UK, Jay Saratitis and Johnny Jones, on the US and the UK and the kind of political opening that we're seeing regarding Palestine. It's really interesting to see what's happening in the UK regarding that. So you get all of these extra episodes, including dives into James Connolly, Walter Rodney, extra think tanks for Matt and I, along with the post game, which I think some of y'all got a preview for last week when Matt accidentally broadcasted that publicly for the first hour. But Matt and I were talking about what we want to do when we hit 1,000. And we remember what we did for TMBS, which was eating the survival bucket challenge. I don't know if people remember that. I'm pretty sure it's still up on YouTube somewhere. But man, was it Ronald Reagan who sent us the tubs? Jim Baker, the kind of the failed televangelist and just incredible criminal, has these nasty, post-apocalyptic survival buckets that you can have after the rapture comes. And we got those. And boy, they were nasty as hell. We got the taco surprise, refried beans. And, I love beans. Like beans are probably one of my favorite foods. It's not the most elegant thing to say is your favorite food, but like a good refried bean, really good charlo beans are some of my favorite things. And it took me a long, long ass time to come around to eat beans after eating that nasty stuff with Michael and Matt a couple of years ago. But we're not going to do anything super nasty like that. I'm sorry. I just can't scar myself again. But we were talking about it could be fun to find a way to maybe get some folks over here at my place, including Matt, and do a kind of live stream barbecue celebration. I know people have been wanting us to do some grill vids, so I was thinking I could have Matt and show him how to maybe make a brisket or something like that and hang out here. But anyways, that's one of our big moves there. Jake says he doesn't know how I mean, that was really early TMBS. Probably around like 30 or 40 episodes in, maybe even earlier than that. It was not good. I can't remember. Someone else was with us too. Who wasn't like, it wasn't Matt or Michael and I, but I can't remember who right now. I'm sorry. But yeah, man, good times to remember that. But please, consider supporting us on Patreon as we're trying to build up all that kind of stuff. Cause it's been super fun, to be able to build this show out. And also I'm looking forward to trying to bring Matt out to Texas. Hot one style tuna. I don't think, I don't mind spice at all, but I wonder if we could get Matt into that. All right. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to getting some chats and stuff, but let's start with some good news. First one, let me see if I can, that's what I'm saying. I think the barbecue is a good idea. We all need some good grill tips from time to time. All right. Let me share my screen with y'all. I think it will work. Awesome. This is did it do it again? I don't know why it does that. This is really incredible news. And I just, in celebration of our first 10K, I want to start off with some good news before we talk about how dark things are. But federal court says Georgia BDS law violates First Amendment. You're seeing here Abby Martin, who has been at the forefront of this case. A federal judge has ruled that Georgia's anti-BDS law is unconstitutional. The ruling comes in response to a lawsuit that was filed against the state by journalist Abby Martin. Martin, a longtime advocate for Palestinian rights and director of the film Gaza Fights for Freedom, was invited to give a talk at Georgia Southern University as part of a media conference in 2020. Shortly before the event, the school sent her a contract to sign, and because of the state's anti-BDS law, it contained a loyalty oath to Israel. By signing the contract, Martin would have promised not to boycott the country. The Council on American Islamic Relations and the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund filed a lawsuit challenging the law on behalf of Martin. And they won, which is absolutely, which is an incredible result, something that you aren't very used to finding in the U.S. This was so egregious, and I just want to say a thank you to Mitchell O'Neill for the super chat there. But, something that you just typically wouldn't expect in the U.S., but this kind of development is just so egregious. If you want to talk about cancel culture, and you're not talking about universities trying to force journalists to signing loyalty pledges to another country to say that you aren't going to engage in protest tactics against a country that is engaged in literal apartheid. It's an absolute slap in the face to any of these kind of American values that, conservatives get so worked up about. And, really good on Abby and all of the folks over there, Empire Files and, Mike Prisner, for standing up against this, because it really is egregious and you have to challenge these things. Because I think most people, when they are, regardless of even what their political view of the situation in Gaza is, right? Most people realize that it's absurd in the United States to be trying to force people into political commitments with regarding the relationship to another country. It's absolutely absurd. And, again, good on Abby and all the folks for standing up against this. And it's a really encouraging result. But it's only one example out of many, many, many on this onslaught on freedom of speech when it comes to Palestine. And it's very funny. I know I'm not the first one to note it. Where the free speech advocates sort of line up on these things. They get all worked up about, comedians sort of being pressured to not show up on campus, right? But when a journalist is showing up, trying to do an academic event and is being forced and required to say certain things, to present a certain viewpoint, they get worked up about that. I'm sorry. I'm very much with Ben on the, let's be against the kind of canceling stuff in general. But I will say that there's a big difference between a comedian sort of being told that, oh, we don't want you to perform at our community, at our college, versus a journalist being told that you need to swear loyalty to a foreign state, or else you're not going to be allowed to speak on our campus. I mean, that's just patently ridiculous. It's un-American, honestly. It's certainly anti-democracy. And anyways, it's a great result, and you need to keep on fighting. Absolutely, it was just such a joke. And Wealth for the 99% says Abby Martin's Empire Files is so good, especially the work around Gaza. Yeah, and we're big fans of all of the folks over there. And I'll note, they've been facing the ringer again with YouTube. It's amazing how, again, talking about cancel culture and free speech, it's amazing how much silence there is around the fact that journalists can't promote a documentary on the platform of YouTube. They can't, hosting it. It's constantly getting flagged. I'm talking about Gaza Fights for Freedom, getting flagged, getting, rated as 18 plus. I was noting on Twitter last week that when we had Abby on TMBS the first time, we clipped those up into shorter segments, and we had one, very specifically about her pitch for the documentary. And Michael and I sitting in the office trying to find a way to pitch a movie about apartheid, about an apartheid is the Israeli apartheid system, about Gaza, about Palestinians, without using any of those words. Because especially then, if you use any of those terms, it would immediately get flagged. It wouldn't get pulled off. I don't want people to get confused, and this might be something that you understand more if you work on the other end of YouTube stuff. But basically, it deems it as not suitable for advertisers. And what that means is not just, you're not going to make money on ads on it. Well, YouTube makes money on ads, so they promote content that's going to make them money, and they put content that they don't think is going to make them money. They sort of hold it down, so it's not going to show up on people's suggested feeds or things like that, right? So it's a big deal. And oftentimes those things will just get straight up flagged and held for a while too. But look, this is again an example of a huge American corporation deciding about what side of this issue you can take in a platform which at this point, I'm sorry, you have to think of these things as digital commons. This is how we create and interact with each other and introduce each other to different ideas. This is the only way for independent journalists to get their message out there for the most part. So it is a big deal when YouTube is making these kind of decisions. So on every avenue, from the literal government, state government of Georgia, to these big platforms that we use, free speech very much is under attack, but not in the way that the right wingers focus on. Yeah, and I think someone's noting what's going on with AP. I mean, that's an even more egregious example too, where somebody got fired for doing Students for Justice in Palestine in college. While we're talking about the AP here, while the AP also has people who are very, very adamant about their support for the IDF, and anti-Palestinian views, and a high position at their Jerusalem bureau. I mean, it's just a complete double standard, and it's obvious why it's the case. because there's an asymmetry of power, not just military power, but political influence. And that's because one group of people, I'm talking about Israel, is represented by a state, right, that has a lot of power all around the globe, has relations, and another group is an open air prison that doesn't even control its own borders. That was such an example, such a disgusting example of the kind of asymmetry on how of that conflict and how it sort of exists on all playing fields, not just in military conflict. Well, let me see, because there's some more good news we got here too. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. Damn. I'm sorry, I don't have the link here, but there's some more good news coming out of Peru, though it does seem like a Shining Path has been back at it, but I didn't pull anything about that. But definitely keep your eyes out for the unfortunate return of that group there. But anyway, in the early polling is showing Pedro Castillo in a pretty exciting and commanding lead. This is from Reuters. Castillo, an elementary school teacher seeking to implement new taxes and royalties on the mining sector, obtained 44.9%, according to a Danton poll published by the newspaper Gestion. The result marked a 2.5 percentage point improvement over his performance in the previous poll by the same company. Fujimori, daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori, who's in jail for human rights abuses and corruption, had a 40.1% support in the poll, marking an increase of 0.1%, according to the survey of about 1,200 people conducted May 18th through 20. This is extremely exciting, especially in the context of what we were talking about last week, how we are seeing this kind of more populist revival across South America. We were talking about what's going on in Chile, the hopes that the neoliberal constitution can finally be buried, that the ghost of Pinochet can finally be vanquished. It's really exciting to see in Peru, too, this opportunity where the left has united against another far-right resurgence in the country, but it's a new formation. And Castillo very much represents an interesting, with its own contradictions and limitations, movement of bringing workers and peasants together to do something radically different. And I think it's notable, how many people, both in the kind of more urban areas of Peru, and then certainly in the U.S. and the West in general, missed this development, this kind of new formation as it was happening. Because it is something that is sort of novel and different, and it's exciting to see. And hopefully it's successful against the right-wing forces. It's incredible to see that, and as is typical in these moments, you saw a bunch of investors and wealthy folks dropping their investments in the country, what we would call a capital strike, basically mass sell-offs, which hurt the value of the sol, the currency of Peru. And this is another great example. Is like whenever a leftist starts leading in the polls, you immediately see a backlash from financial interests. And we talk about that a lot on this show and talked about a lot on TMBS, but this is another great example of how democracy and capitalism very much are not compatible systems, because you can't have a bunch of private interests controlling the currency, in the value of the currency essentially, and the value of assets in the country, if you want to have a functioning democracy, especially in countries like Peru, because these people are able to dictate their will in a way that is fundamentally undemocratic. The best example we had, to try to paint this picture, was what was going on in Argentina when they were trying to put forward a very modest wealth tax. You saw both this kind of initial punishment, right, just tanking of the markets, along with capital flight. And this just shows again that having private control of so much of the economy in a small group of people who have very particular interests is always going to be something that is in conflict with democracy. And they don't like Castillo because, as we noted, this is somebody who wants to increase taxes on the wealthy. He wants to have more state control over the resources in the country. So it's very much against their interests, and they're using these tools. I think the one thing I just want people to note from this is it's not that, oh, rich people think this guy would be bad for the economy, so they're pulling their money out of their investments, right? It's that rich people understand that they have leverage to show their weight and power, and they are making a threat that if this happens, we will punish the country. It's what they call a capital strike. You're very familiar with what a labor strike is, but capital strike is very, very prevalent and effective in getting the will of the rich to be met, right? Where essentially the rich say, we're going to pull the money out, the private power that we have in society, and we're going to flex that muscle to get certain goals achieved. Well, let me see. Christopher Kahn says, thanks for spreading the word about the miners' strike in Alabama. Was happy to tune in and contribute. Thank you so much. And that was so much fun on Friday. It was great being able to have a couple of virtual beers with our friends at the Valley Labor Report, and even more exciting to see how much money we were able to raise for all those folks. From what it seemed, the concert on Saturday seemed to be a lot of fun, and being able to be a part of showing solidarity with all of those people who've been risking their lives and their livelihood to fight against unfair treatment has been a really beautiful thing. And thank you all so much for contributing last Friday night, because it was a really, really incredible experience, and something that I think is important for us to start to develop our capacities to do things like that. It felt really good, and we couldn't have done it without all of y'all. Well, Sam says, this has become my favorite podcast. Well, thank you so much. As a huge NBA fan, you and Matt are becoming the Shaq and Kobe of my political education. Well, that's quite the comparison. I really appreciate that. I guess I would have to be Shaq in the duo, though I would prefer to be Kobe. But I guess we can let Matt have that one. Thanks so much, Sam, for the chat there. Yeah, we raised something around $70,000, I think. It was a really beautiful moment, and so much work. And like, seriously, congrats and thanks so much to the guys at the Valley Labor Report. Not only do they do really great reporting and host a lot of important voices, but putting all that together was really exceptional. From the stream alone would have been amazing, but the concert and getting everybody there was a really, really incredible moment. Let me see. David, you inspired me to smoke a chicken, which I immediately did after donating to the Strike Fest. I love to hear them being a good influence on folks. Let me see. Well, so Jake has some things about Capital Flight. I'll get to that in a second. But before we get that, people were talking about hush puppies. And I got to say, as somebody who spent a good bit of my life in South Carolina, I love hush puppies. They're absolutely delicious. I like them sweet and I like them savory. It's one of those things that's super good. I also like hoe cakes too. Anyways, I enjoy being able to answer questions about BBQ and hush puppies, but I want to respond to what's being said about Capital Flight, because I think it would be a mistake to say that capital strikes and capital flights are not a big part of U.S. history. In fact, one of the most, and this is one of the big points, and it's something that we're all learning together, that you have to unlearn some things. One big point that we try to make on this show is understanding that, politics, while there are good and bad people, if you just think about it in this kind of, that politics in the United States, for example, is just a kind of like battle between like sinister and cynical actors versus like true believers, and not actual fights over distribution of power, you'd be making a huge mistake. A great example of this is Barack Obama. Early on, we talk about how Obama wins this election in the middle of a financial crisis with a huge mandate, right? You win Congress. You have the presidency. People think that there's going to be this huge shift. There's a lot of appetite. I mean, Obama ran on the the line hope and change. But what happens? It's a huge disaster. The most notable legislation that they get through is Obamacare, which obviously it was able to eradicate some of the more absurd and egregious parts of our healthcare system, but it was also a huge handout to the immoral and evil insurance industry, right? And that's a great example of what you got under Obama was a lot of talk about changing the fabric of the society, all the while really entrenching the power of capital. And why was that? Because early on in Obama's presidency, you saw an extreme hoarding of wealth from the most powerful and wealthy people in society, right? Which was them flexing their muscle by refusing to invest, right? So like a capital strike in this example, you have to understand it like a capitalist, right? You have capital, you need to invest capital to make this whole system work, right? That's how capitalism functions. Yes, it functions through the exploitation of labor, but to create the conditions for that, a capitalist first has to invest money up front at the top of production, and then they extract. That's where the exploitation comes through on the other side of production. What you saw in the early Obama administration in his presidency was the ruling class, was the capital class refusing to invest, holding onto their money, right? And that's why, and Obama came running to the table to negotiate with them. Instead of doing, for example, what we would hope a Bernie Sanders would do, would be to leverage the power of the state and leverage the power of the movement to challenge these forces. Obama wasn't interested in that because wasn't interested in class conflict. He also wasn't interested in, fundamentally changing the material reality of the United States, right? But you have to understand that dynamic, the early Obama presidency, as an example of capital strike. That's an important lesson for all of us to understand going forward, is to understand how these dynamics play in politics, that we don't necessarily, because of the way we're taught to think about politics in the United States, as political, right? Because the neoliberal model neoliberalism is a funky term to use sometimes because people think of it as like a policy prescription, like, okay, here are the neoliberal policies versus the non-neoliberal policies, right? And I use it in that framework too sometimes, but fundamentally what neoliberalism is a belief in the complete rationality of the market and the idea that you need to allow the market to exist under its own conditions and to not let politics involve itself with that, right? And the policy prescriptions that come out of that, we can rightfully label neoliberalism, but don't forget to, sort of zoom out a little bit further back to understand what that system is. And the kind of idea of the way that most people think about politics is a neoliberal understanding of politics, right? Where we don't think about the economy and like the actions of the wealthy and the state of investment in the United States as something that's political. We think about that as the rational part of society, right? The rational part being the people who have all the money making decisions. That's supposedly rational and not a political choice, right? And they're just reacting to what's happening in the political arena. Well, a Marxist understanding recognizes that the rich reacting to what's happening in politics is a political act. It's not separate from the sphere of politics. In fact, it's very, very much involved in that. So I would disagree with saying that we don't experience capital strikes in the United States. It's a very different way that they happen than when it's like super explicit, right? When you have capital flight, like you're seeing in Argentina, but it's very much a part of our politics. And Kyle says, was capital flight response to Lula and Dilma? Yeah, there was capital flight and capital strike there as well. Let me make sure I'm all right. Well, thanks so much. Left is best. Says Senators Moran, Klobuchar, and Leahy introduced a bill to lift embargo on Cuba a few days ago. Biggest disappointment for me with Biden is his continued Trump foreign policy on Latin America. I know what Biden is doing regarding Latin America is beyond contemptible. Not only are these people who were supposed to be running on returning decency to American politics and American foreign policy, continuing one of the most egregious examples of Trumpism, but they've doubled down on it and said that they believe that that Cuba needs to be on the the state sponsors of terrorism list because of their support for Venezuela. Give me a break. It's despicable to even make that insinuation. And to do it from both sides of your mouth, like the Biden administration has done, has been absolutely terrible. The one good thing about Cuba is that Cuba will outlive Biden, and Cuba will outlive Bidenism, as they have met challenge and threat time and time again and have come out successful. All right. Jacob says the Dems are really going to blow the midterms, aren't they? Are they doing this on purpose? Liberal centrist parties in other countries aren't like this. Do Dems genuinely not desire political power? Why? I think that the Democratic Party is very, very much likely to lose big in the midterms because they don't. And it's, we talked about this at the end. People should check out the video. At the end of a video we put out last week on just the horrible disaster that has been the Texas the Texas legislature's session this year. Where it's like, we all know the line on the GOP. They're a horrifying death cult. But then you wonder, where the hell is that opposition? And in a lot of like the really meaningful ways, they're standing with the GOP either as silent partners or as explicit ones. And as to why Biden and all the Democrats, don't seem to want to win the midterm election, I think there are two theories on it, right? I don't want to do too much hot take, but there's one, which is the idea that they don't want to shift the material conditions too much in this country because functionally they operate as the party of big capital just as much as the GOP does. But since they paint themselves as like the friend of the workers and the friend of like the more everyday person, at least in the North and in Democrat, controlled states, that's how they present themselves. They have to sort of do these half measures, but they can never go all the way because then that thing would be settled, right? I think that's one take on it. The other one is more where I feel about these things, which is, the Democratic Party functionally operates very well in this kind of position where they can say, look, there are all these things that we want to do, but we're not allowed to do them because the GOP is obstructing us. And it's a very dangerous position for them to be in, where they actually have the ability to leverage their power. So they are, preemptively negotiating themselves down so that they're not able to, show that how ineffective they are at government, but are able to make the excuse that, oh, well, we're not able to do this, because the GOP effectively is stopping us. It's just at the end of the day, the position and the goal of the Democratic Party is to manage the left, to manage the working class, to manage social justice and civil rights movements, rather than to be an extension of them. The Democratic Party is very much not rooted in any of these classes or social movements. They're functionally set up to manage them. And since they have to manage them, that means that you can get some leverage from them and get concessions from them from time to time. But as a party organization, as a formation, they are effectively just managers of these social movements and trying to prevent them from ever having a more effective and popular basis. I don't know. Could be more on that down the line. Larry, I believe, read on MB Legacy channel that you were still planning a book based on you and Michael's dialogues. Is it still happening? Any info? Greetings from Berlin. I'm assuming that says, I'm sorry. I just, not to disappoint my German ancestors, but I don't want to I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings too much by trying German on the stream. Yeah, we're working on that. Looks like, we might be able to line a publisher. It's a big, big task. I mean, I'm really excited. It means a lot. Michael and I were working on a book before he passed. And for folks who don't know, Michael and I wrote the shows TMBS. A lot of those opening, dialogues and conversations, weren't like a explicit script, but were sort of worked out and hashed out beforehand. And we were trying to turn those into kind of book form to connect some of the dots that we wanted people to recognize that we were saying. Yeah, we're working on it. I'm excited about it. It's the only hesitation you're getting from me is that it's a huge task, and I've been sort of going through it and trying to work on it. It's intellectually difficult and also obviously emotionally difficult, but we're working and hopefully be able to produce something down the line. I'm at least trying to get a strong outline done very, very soon. But I very much appreciate the support and the interest. Charles Raintree says, "Congrats on 10,000. I really appreciate it. Would you agree that Waylon Live is the greatest country music album of all time?" I mean, I think Waylon Jennings, as Chris Christopherson says, is the table thumping smash. So any kind of Waylon is definitely one of my favorites. Greatest country music album of all time? I don't know. That might be a little bit of a stretch. When I try to get people into country music, I usually don't start with Waylon, because if you don't like going to honky tonk, like if you don't have that kind of image of what this music really is, like being in a crowd and going wild and having a good time, it doesn't translate as well as some of the more universal parts of country music, which are like the storytelling and like the storytelling and the openness and things like that. I don't know. Waylon Jennings is, I think, as much as I try to present myself as a big country music head, and I should have like very eclectic and some very obscure guy who I think is, this is the best album or the best singer. I'm very much pop in the sense that I love Waylon Jennings probably more than anybody. Waylon Jennings who I listen to more than anyone else. So absolutely love Waylon. What are your thoughts about how a central bank digital currency will affect progressive agendas? I talked to an Argentine, and they're all for Bitcoin. Talk to you guys, and you rip on it. Why is that? Well, I think there are two different questions there. I don't know who you're talking to in Argentina about this, but I would just top line would point to the incredible variability in Bitcoin prices over the past couple of weeks is probably an example as why I don't think that it's something that we should be basing any kind of left project on. Second, what do I think about a digital currency? I mean, isn't a lot of currency digital right now anyway, in the sense that it's not reflective of paper money, but on things that are created in ledgers, in bank accounts and things like that. I mean, there already is an expansion on digital currency. I think that's a good thing. I'm at the end of the day, the reason maybe I'm not particularly interested in these is I do not think that currency solutions are going to get us out of any kind of conjuncture that we're in today. For example, and like a great example of this is not a new thing for like American left movements to get fixated on. One of the big failures of the early populist movement, the People's Party, was their fixation that a shift in the monetary policy of the United States, even though it was beneficial, was going to fundamentally change the game. And it just became something that was very easy for the Democratic Party to pick up. Talking about free silver. For the Democratic Party to pick up and put in their platform, and was completely able to demobilize a mass popular movement, right? And I think looking back at that as a historical example, you can see that the over-reliance on monetary policy as a way of like recruitment is like getting people worked up, instead of talking about the more structural material reasons that currency matters. Like, okay, let me zoom out for a second, so for people who aren't familiar, right? You have this horrible issue in the United States where basically, if you're a farmer who has to borrow money at the beginning of the farming season, and then pay it back at the end of the season because the value of money was constantly increasing, you were in a worse off position on the other end, right? Because at the end of the day, in like real terms to you, your debt was growing exponentially while you were working to pay it off, while you were working to meet the conditions of the debt, which meant that for an entire class of farmers, and less so, but similarly, an entire class of laborers, they were just in a constant state of debt. And people attributed this to the fact that the United States had a gold-backed currency, and gold was becoming more and more scarce, right? Which meant that the price of the dollar and the price of gold, by that relationship, was constantly increasing. So there was a push to reimagine the U.S. dollar by incorporating silver as something that was backing the U.S. currency, right? And the idea there is that if you could sort of stabilize the currency, you could benefit the people, right? And I think there's no doubt about it that this system was designed and was perpetuated because it benefited the people at the top of the American financial system, right? But because it became the fixation, it's money, right? It's gold. It's these immaterial things. It became an easier story to tell than to start to talk about the actual fundamental natures of capitalism. And eventually, the People's Party, the populist movement, they have their movement co-opted by the Democratic Party, which then was very quick to incorporate policies of silver-backed currency into their platform as well. And it decimated the movement. So when it comes to these kind of currency debates, I just think that it's a really easy thing to sell people, and it oftentimes obscures the actual like material relations and the fundamental criticism of capitalism as a system. Well, here we go. William H. says, David, congrats on 10K. When you reach 1,000 patrons, would you rather eat an Alex Jones Liberty food bucket or read and review a Ben Shapiro novel? Oh, man, I don't know. That might be tough. I think Ben Shapiro, I do not want to go through another bean experience with an Alex Jones cooking. I do not trust Alex Jones food. So just on the serious fear of what might be taken from me, like I almost lost my love of beans because of Jim Baker's food bucket. I don't think I can ever do another food bucket, so I'd have to go with Ben Shapiro there. But I think we're going to try to do something a little bit more fun for us too. Let me see. I don't know what y'all are talking about, but I do like drive-by truckers a lot, so I endorse as well. Though I will say, as much as I like their music, I know they showed up I know that they show up and they do awesome stuff, like showing up at the concert in Alabama. But I actually didn't know too much about their political work, other than they're just like good guys. So that was definitely. I'm definitely a fan of that. Let's see. Eddie Finlaw, thanks so much for the super chat. Says, any concerns about the libertarian movement with the recent growth of ANCAP figures like the Mises Caucus, Michael Malice, Eric July, Tom Woods, etc.? I mean, there's a reason that libertarians are very amicable to like capital, and that they develop politically in the United States without too much resistance from the state. So I'm not surprised when I see movements rise from time to time. I don't think that these are big threats. I think they're worth convincing people against them, because just like any ideology that is like convincing people to not pay attention to the real factors and the real reasons that they're struggling, their communities are struggling, something that we should oppose and defeat. ideologically and rhetorically. But I don't think that we're like on a threat of some kind of like libertarian movement, because we already live in the dictatorship of capital. Whatever story they need to sell people to justify it doesn't change. So yeah, I think, push back against those, but I don't find these to be like, oh, we're going to live in a more capitalist society, right? We're going to live in the society until we build working power that the rich want us to live in, and that's sort of what the story has been for a very, very, very long time when it comes to those kind of more fringe right-wing movements. We're early today because producer Forrest happens to be in Austin, and I'm going to go grab a happy hour drink with him to catch up. I haven't seen him since since quarantine began, so I'm very excited. I appreciate all of y'all so much. Let me see. We got a lot of questions. I'm happy to answer those and answer more. We'll have a couple more minutes. I want to make sure I'm not losing anything. This Thursday, we're going to have Jathan Sadowski on, who is a good friend. I'm very happy to have him on Left Reckoning, and he'll be joining us, calling in from Australia. We're very excited for that. We're going to be talking about, let me pull it up real quick, his book. Let me get the title right for y'all, because it's a long one. This Machine Kills, host of This Machine Kills, and author of Too Smart: How Digital Capitalism is Extracting Data, Controlling Our Lives, and Taking Over the World. I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be this Sunday at 7 Central, 8 Eastern. Thanks, Kale. And what else? So we're doing that on Thursday. Also, next month, we're going to be taking 1 week off, but we'll still have content up. Just so folks know, in July, I think Matt and I are going to move the show to Wednesday at the same time. So Wednesday, 7 Central, 8 Eastern. I just think that that's going to work a little bit better for everybody in the schedule. Thursday's feeling a little cluttered too. I don't want to be, I don't know. I don't mind doing a show on Wednesday night. I like being able to go out on Thursday night too in general. So I think we might be doing that. But if that's a huge, huge deal for y'all, let us know. But we're definitely considering this. Jeffrey Estrada says, ask Honky Tonk Radio Girl, WFMU, Wednesday afternoon for the greatest assortment of country oldies. I hope people weren't misunderstanding me when I was saying about country music. I love country music very much, and I would consider myself a little bit of a scholar. But what I'm saying is, despite all of the time finding more obscure stuff, I really do find myself just returning to Waylon Jennings all the time. I gotta say though, my favorite person to listen to right now is Billy Joe Shaver. I've been on a real Billy Joe Shaver kick. Fast Train to Georgia, Ragged Old Truck. I mean, that guy could write a song like nobody's business. In fact, he got his start really writing for Waylon Jennings. And actually, that's a good story. Maybe I'll close with that because it's one of my favorite stories of all time. So, Waylon Jennings, this is when Waylon Jennings is at the height of his popularity, sold out stadiums all across the country. When he would do these, though, he would always do free concerts in rec centers in Indian country, which was something I always really respected about him. Anyway, so he's at the height of his popularity, and I believe it was the first or second of Willie Nelson's famous July 4th picnics. And this is before Austin sort of people think about Willie Nelson a lot when they think about Austin and Austin's music scene. But really it was Billy Joe Shaver and Jerry Jeff Walker who were trailblazers, especially in the country music scene. And anyway, so Billy Joe Shaver's there, but he's not making any money. He's playing clubs and concerts. He's somebody people had respect for. But it was Willie Nelson sort of coming back to Austin from Nashville, and he sets up this big concert for July 4th. And Billy Joe Shaver's there, and he's playing his songs. If people haven't seen Billy Joe Shaver, really, you got to watch you got to watch him play. He's a music artist, obviously, but you got to just the way that he uses his hands and his body. He's very much a performer in the full sense of the word. Anyways, he's playing a show at I believe the first July 4th Willie Nelson's first July 4th picnic, and as he's playing the show, there is an extremely drunk and inebriated fan in the front row, just losing his mind. Probably one of the few people there, and that super messed up guy was Waylon Jennings, who then goes on and tells Billy Joe Shaver, he's like, all right, Hoss, you got to come back with me to Nashville. We'll record some of your music. Billy Joe Shaver's like, hell yeah, I finally made it, right? This is my big break. So a little while goes by. Billy doesn't hear much. He's waiting. He decides, all right, I guess I just need to drive back to Nashville to see what's up. He goes and tries to find Waylon. Waylon's not picking up the phone. He's not able to get in contact with him. But basically one night he's out drinking and he talks to somebody who says, "Oh, I've been working out at the studio. I know where Waylon is. He's working on an album. I can tell you where it is, but don't say I told you." Well, Billy Joe Shaver shows up and is basically adamant that he goes and sees Waylon Jennings. And of course, the people at the front are like, "What the hell?" Waylon Jennings is like one of the biggest, music artists in the country at that point. No, we're not letting you in to go see Waylon Jennings. But Billy Joe is like quite adamant, is not leaving. So eventually, some guy comes out with a $100 bill on it and says, "Oh, Waylon says, that thank you so much for coming by, but he can't see, and this is for your trouble." And he gives him $100. He gives him a $100 bill folded up real nice. And Billy Joe Shaver takes the $100 bill, gives it back to the guy, and he says, "You can tell Waylon to take that and stick it up his ass and twist it." So then coming out of so he's still not leaving. And then Waylon Jennings finally comes out surrounded by his entourage of big biker guys. And Billy Joe Shaver, who I think was in a little bit of a state at this time, says to Waylon Jennings is like, what are you doing here? And Billy Joe Shaver says, you promised me that you'd write my songs. You promised me we'd do an album together. And Waylon says, "I don't remember promising you shit." And then Billy Joe Shaver responds and he says, "Well, either you go in there and let me record some songs with you, or I'm going to kick your ass right here in front of everybody." Somehow that worked. Waylon Jennings let him go into the recording studio, and he says, "Here's how it's going to work. You play me one song, and if I like it, you can play another. And if I like that one, I'll let you play one more. But if at any point I don't like your songs, you're out of here." Anyways, Billy Joe Shaver goes on, and I think he plays one of my favorite songs, "Ain't No God in Mexico," another song called "Honky Tonk Heroes," and a few more. And then next thing you know, Waylon Jennings records one of his big albums, "Honky Tonk Heroes," composed primarily from Billy Joe Shaver's song. Let me see if I can get an album cover, because you can see Billy Joe Shaver on it. Which is just, anyways, it's a good lesson to y'all that sometimes being rambunctious and not taking no for an answer can turn you into a country music legend. But most of the time, it's probably a good recipe for you getting your ass beat. All right, let me see if I can get one of these just big as a little farewell. All right, here we go. So right there, that's Waylon Jennings, and that's Billy Joe Shaver right there. I don't know, man. Something else, different kind of folks back then. Anyway, y'all, hope that was interesting. I will see y'all on Thursday at 7 Central. Looking forward to hanging out. I'm gonna have talking with Jason Sadowski. It's gonna be a good time. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Support us on Patreon. And don't forget, if you've missed it yesterday, our conversation with Jace and Johnny about Palestine and the UK and the US, and sort of comparing and contrasting what's happening in popular culture between these two countries. Anyways,